In the middle of Burkina Faso's dry season, a team of student volunteers uncovered a sealed trapdoor beneath the ruins of an old French military outpost. What lay beneath changed everything. Stacked in brittle boxes, buried under decades of dust, were over 200 handwritten letters. All were written between 1943 and 1961 by African soldiers who had fought under the French flag in World War II in Burkina and Algeria. None of the letters had ever been delivered. They were meant for mothers, lovers, sons who never heard their names spoken again. When President Ibrahim Traoré saw the letters, he didn't call a press conference. He flew quietly to the site, and after hours, reading in silence, he said just one sentence: "If their words were once too dangerous to be heard, then the world needs to hear them now." Within a week, the letters were published online. France reacted with alarm, but something unexpected happened. French citizens began to recognize names. Grandparents remembered stories. A reckoning began to unfold. And in that silence between the lines, a forgotten truth demanded to be heard. The letters were digitized and translated within days. A special platform, launched under the title La Voix Perdue, The Lost Voice, allowed people around the world to read them in French, Mauvais, Dioula, and English. The impact was immediate. Each letter carried a weight deeper than history books ever allowed. A soldier named Isaka wrote of freezing nights in Alsace, wondering if his village still existed. Another, named Boubacar, described patching up wounded comrades in Algeria, only to be barred from the officer's tent because of his skin. A third, anonymous, wrote, "I do not know if you will ever read this, but I wanted you to know I died as a soldier, but not as a citizen." None of these words had reached their destination until now. At first, the reaction in France was mixed. Official channels issued cautious statements about ongoing archival assessments, but online, the letters sparked a tidal wave. French grandchildren posted photos of letters with captions like, "This man saved my grandfather. Why did we never know his name?" Traoré remained silent. He refused interviews, declined political commentary. Instead, he ordered Burkina Faso's National Archive to release all available records of African participation in foreign wars, regardless of how it might reflect on international relationships. That decision drew backlash. A prominent French minister warned that selective remembrance risks destabilizing long-standing ties. Several French-owned NGOs operating in Burkina Faso quietly suspended projects. One embassy official was overheard saying, "He's not rewriting history, he's unerasing it." But within Burkina Faso, something else was happening. Radio stations began airing nightly readings of the letters. Schools replaced one history unit with a week of community storytelling. Survivors, men once forgotten, came forward with medals, kept in silence for half a century. And then came a twist no one anticipated. A woman in Marseille, Aga 83, contacted a Burkinabe journalist. She had found a letter among her father's belongings, never opened, addressed to Chiri Fatoumata. Inside was a photograph of a man in uniform, standing beside a French child. "My mother told me a soldier once saved us." The woman said, "I never knew he was African." That photo, reprinted in newspapers across continents, changed the tone of the global response. The world wasn't watching a political statement. It was witnessing the reunion of a story long denied its ending. As the photo of the unknown African soldier and the French child spread across Europe and Africa, public sentiment began to shift. University students in Paris organized a silent march, holding enlarged copies of the letters. In Lyon, a granddaughter of a former French general publicly acknowledged that her family's lineage had been built on the invisible foundation of African sacrifice. She said in an interview, "We can't talk about French pride without including African grief." Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, President Traoré called a private meeting with his closest advisors, The question on the table wasn't whether to escalate the matter politically, but whether to allow it to remain purely human. If we make demands now, one advisor warned, they'll accuse us of using the dead to bargain for the living, but Traoré had already made his decision. He announced the formation of an international cultural initiative, Letters That Lived, with the mission to return each letter to the family of its author, where possible, translate and archive all letters as part of UNESCO's Memory of the World program, build a joint memorial space in both Burkina Faso and France. He emphasized that no reparations were being requested, no apologies demanded, only recognition and restoration. The French government, caught between pressure and shame, sent a Kiev envoy to Ouagadougou. No press, no photo ops, just one handwritten note from the Élysée, "We're listening." In the following weeks, more connections emerged. A retired French pilot recalled escorting African troops during colonial campaigns. A Parisian historian discovered that several African regiments were deliberately omitted from official records post-World War II. But the most moving moment came when a group of young Burkinabe students visited a cemetery in Normandy. They stood before the unmarked graves of African soldiers and read aloud excerpts from the letters. One student, barely 16, whispered, "You were not forgotten. We just hadn't been born yet to remember you." For Traoré, this was not a geopolitical victory. It was the beginning of something sacred, the recovery of a narrative stolen not just from Africa, but from history itself. And perhaps more importantly, it was a reminder to the world that even in silence, the truth has a pulse, and once heard, it cannot be unheard. President Ibrahim Traoré did not call for reparations. He did not summon ambassadors or file complaints. Instead, he extended an invitation, one rooted in memory, not in politics. At a press conference held under open sky beside the old colonial outpost, he announced a new international summit, the gathering of forgotten regiments. It would be open to all descendants of African soldiers who had served under colonial command from across the continent, and from Europe. The summit would have no flags, no formal state speeches. It would feature letters, voix, and names, many of which had been buried for decades. His words were simple. This is not about war. This is about those who were told they did not belong to the history they helped shape. We are here to give them back their place. The reaction was swift and uneven. In diplomatic circles, confusion gave way to concern. Several Western media outlets ran headlines questioning Traoré's motives. One commentator on a European network asked, "Is this the soft rise of historical nationalism in Africa?" Others accused him of manipulating grief. Behind closed doors, pressure increased. A major humanitarian organization quietly froze a literacy grant. Cultural partnerships that had operated for years suddenly went silent. Anonymous briefings warned of ideological instability in Burkina Faso's leadership, but the people responded differently. Families across West Africa began to send in old photos, faded documents, fragments of medals, anything that might reconnect the living to the forgotten. In villages, elders told stories they had withheld for generations. In France, students began organizing reading circles, reciting the letters in both French and African languages. And then came a moment no analyst had predicted. A small museum in southern France, long overlooked, opened its war archives to the public. Within days, a visitor team discovered match records, names, dates of letters that matched Traoré's archive. One curator wept on national radio, saying, "And we have spoken of liberty and equality. Perhaps this is our chance to prove fraternity." Traoré said nothing to his critics. Instead, he traveled to schools, reading one letter at each stop. He spoke not as a head of state, but as a grandson of those who had been told to forget. "You were not ghosts," he read aloud one afternoon. "You were soldiers. You were sons. You were ours." And just like that, the silence that had once buried them began to break, not through force, but through remembrance. The summit opened without banners, without orchestras, without a red carpet, and nailed on the grounds where the letters had first been uncovered. The gathering of forgotten regiments welcomed people from across continents, descendants, historians, brutes, veterans, and students. There were no diplomatic delegations. Only names. Namizwancherast, now spoken aloud. President Ibrahim Traoré walked into the ceremony alone. Visitalcomboi, no bodyguards in sight. In his hand, he carried a simple cloth bundle inside. 3 letters written by soldiers from Burkina Faso who never returned home. He stepped onto the platform, looked out at the crowd, and began to read. His voice did not rise, did not dramatize. He read as one speaks to family. I fought in your war, and now I fight with my memory. Do not let my children forget me. Letter from Private D. Itinjobai Wushas. A hush fell over the assembly. Some wept quietly, others closed their eyes. Then came the unexpected. A French woman, standing near the back, stepped forward. She held in her hand a yellowed photograph, a soldier standing beside her father. She spoke in a trembling voice. My family told stories of a man who saved my grandfather's life. We never knew his name, but now I see his letter here. His handwriting, his story is ours. 2. Traoré nodded, stepped down, and embraced her. There was no speech. The moment itself was enough. After that, letters were passed from hand to hand. Students read them aloud in 3 languages. Musicians played old marching tunes, not in celebration of war, but in memory of those who endured it. Outside the venue, reporters tried to frame the event in political terms. They asked, "Is this a challenge to French legacy?" But the answer had already been spoken, not through microphones, but through memory. "We are not here to rewrite your history," Traoré had said earlier that day. "We are here to finish writing ours." The summit ended with no declarations, no joint statements. But in the days that followed, French universities began creating digital memorials. Young people traced their lineage, asking questions long silenced. And in homes across Burkina Faso, for the first time in generations, names were spoken aloud with pride, not just as victims, but as voice. The moment of reckoning had arrived, not with a demand, but with a whisper that refused to die. The summit passed, but its echoes did not fade. Across Burkina Faso, families who had never spoken of the past now gathered around radios and classroom walls, reading the letters out loud. In one rural school, a child stood before the class and recited, "He never made it home, but now we brought him back." In France, something unexpected began to stir. A small museum in Lyon dedicated a wing to African colonial troops. A prestigious university introduced a new module titled Voices from the Shadows. French families, long unaware but their ancestors' comrades, started sending letters of their own apologies, gratitude, remembrance, and still, Traoré refused to glow it. A should no demands claimed no victory. Instead, he wrote one final message, not to France, not to politicians, but to the people of the world. A letter, shared in dozens of languages, published with no seal or signature, only this title, The Right to be Remembered. In it, he wrote, "No soldier should be anonymous, no sacrifice should be buried in silence. History is not the property of the powerful, it is the inheritance of those who lived it. We do not seek compensation. We do not need your guilt. We need space to grieve, and the dignity to do so in our own names." The message resonated far beyond its origin. In Latin America, indigenous groups began reclaiming oral histories once dismissed as myth. In Asia, families of colonial laborers launched public archives of their own. But perhaps the most moving effect was found in a single image, a classroom wall in Burkina Faso, painted with 50 names from the forgotten letters. No explanation, just names. Children would pass it each day, learning to spell, to speak, to remember. One teacher said, "Before, we taught them dates. Now, we teach them names." The final act was quiet. A modest plaque placed at the foot of the former French outpost now reads, "Here, silence was broken. Here, Voices came home. Traoré never called it justice. He never claimed it was enough, but he reminded the world of something deeper, that healing is not granted by governments. It begins when a people reclaim the words once taken from them. And perhaps that, more than any treaty or apology, is what real sovereignty looks like, because remembrance is not weakness. It is resistance, without rage, without war, and without permission. There are moments in history when leadership is not measured by the ability to command armies or sway markets, but by the courage to tell a forgotten truth, and to do so without bitterness. Beneath the French Flag is not just a fictional story about buried letters and distant wars. No, it is a meditation on dignity, silence, and the right to remembrance. President Ibrahim Traoré's choice to unearth and amplify the letters of African soldiers, many of whom died serving a foreign flag, was not merely symbolic. It was an act of narrative sovereignty. He did not demand reparations or issue threats. Instead, he listened, he read, and he let those who had once been voiceless speak again, this time to a world that could no longer look away. This approach is radically different from the conventional path of post-colonial reckoning, which often oscillates between diplomatic conflict and historical erasure. Traoré understood that political capital gained from anger is fleeting, but moral capital built on shared memory can outlast governments. He used memory not as a weapon, but as a bridge. The emotional core of the story lies not in the confrontation with France, but in the quiet power of reconnection. Children reciting names once lost, descendants on both sides of history discovering shared stories, and a leader who knew when to speak and when to let the past speak for itself. It's also worth noting the restraint shown throughout. In a time when outrage is easily weaponized, Traoré modeled a different form of leadership, one that heals by recognition, not retaliation. He didn't rewrite history, he completed it. And in doing so, he invited others, former colonizers, included, to walk alongside, not behind. His summit was not a political event. It was a ceremony of return, a return of words, names, photos, and truths. And in that act, Traoré demonstrated something profoundly rare, the ability to wield historical pain with grace. What makes this story even more compelling is that it doesn't end in triumph. It ends in quiet legacy. There is no courtroom, no televised apology, no victorious handshake. Instead, there are murals in schools, archived letters in libraries, and names spoken over kitchen tables after generations of silence. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful resolution imaginable. The message Traoré sends to the world is layered. To France, it is an invitation to grow up alongside its history, not away from it. To Africa, it is a call to reclaim narratives long exported, edited, or ignored. And to the rest of the world, it is a warning. If we continue to forget those who carried the weight of history without reward, we will lose the moral thread that binds us. But beyond geopolitics and legacy, this story touches something deeply human. In every letter read aloud, there is a father hoping to be remembered, a son unsure if he will return, a friend trying to say goodbye. These are not the voices of ideology, they are the voices of love, fear, and hope, the real currencies of history. In a time when powerful nations often define peace through the absence of conflict rather than the presence of justice, Beneath the French Flag shows us a different path, one where remembrance is not transactional, one where healing is not strategic, one where dignity is not begged for, it is simply acknowledged. The emotional resonance of the story does not come from grandeur, but from restraint. There is no dramatic courtroom scene or fiery speech, just a leader kneeling before forgotten letters and a classroom learning to pronounce unfamiliar names with care. This is the work of peace. It is slow, uncomfortable, and sometimes invisible, but it is real. President Traoré's role in this fictional narrative reminds us that leadership is not about dominating headlines. It is about shaping the quiet currents beneath them. By choosing to remember what others forgot, And by refusing to weaponize the pain of the past, he set an example for a new kind of global statesmanship, rooted not in force, but in moral clarity. And perhaps most importantly, he reminded the world that some debts are not paid in money, or treaties, or medals. Some debts are paid by listening, and then by never forgetting again. When a nation like Burkina Faso, long seen only through the lens of struggle and survival, takes it upon itself to restore dignity to men, forgotten by both empire and history, the world is forced to pause. It is not often that global conscience is stirred not by violence, not by protest, but by reverence, and it is even rarer that a head of state refuses to turn pain into leverage. Ibrahim Traoré, in this story, doesn't ask the world to feel guilty. He simply insists that it must feel. That subtle shift from accusation to acknowledgement may be what allows this story to resonate beyond borders, beyond politics, and into the homes and hearts of people who have never set foot in Burkina Faso or France. It speaks to a deeper truth, that history is not just what we remember, it is also who we choose to forget. The letters, once sealed in darkness, now live in the light. They belong not just to one people or one flag, but to the global fabric of memory that connects every struggle, every sacrifice, every silence name. And in choosing to read them out loud in classrooms, gatherings, Sami Traoré does more than revive voice. He redeems them. It is a reminder to us all, not every war ends when the guns fall silent. Some wars against erasure, against silence, against historical amnesia, take generations. And sometimes it takes just one man, one box of letters, and the courage to remember, to begin the long road home.